the hotel that made people leave earlier than planned. At first, no one understood why departures kept happening. Guests arrived intending to stay for weeks. Many left days earlier than expected, unsettled but strangely certain. To understand how a hotel could cause people to shorten their own stays voluntarily, we have to revisit a moment when luxury stopped being about escape and started becoming about confrontation. Because as comfort reached perfection, it began removing the excuses people used to avoid decisions they had been postponing for years. This hotel did not offer distraction. It offered clarity, and clarity has consequences. From the outside, nothing suggested disruption. The building was calm, beautifully maintained, and intentionally understated, avoiding spectacle in favor of restraint. Inside, service was flawless but minimal, designed to respond rather than entertain. There were no overwhelming schedules, no constant activities, no urgency disguised as hospitality. The hotel did not try to occupy its guests. It left them alone. That was the first reveal. Guests expected relaxation. What they encountered was space. Space without interruption. Space without stimulation. Space where time passed without being filled on their behalf. At first, this felt luxurious. Then it felt unfamiliar. Then it felt demanding. Without noise to lean on, thoughts surfaced quickly. Without distractions, postponed questions rose to the surface. Guests found themselves thinking about decisions they had delayed, conversations they had avoided, and lives they had been maintaining rather than choosing. The hotel never encouraged reflection. It simply made avoidance difficult. The reveal deepened as patterns emerged. Guests slept deeply, then woke unsettled. Days felt complete sooner than expected. There was nothing left to do because nothing was trying to be done. And in that stillness, clarity arrived faster than most people were comfortable with. Some guests described a strange sensation. They felt finished, not with the hotel, with something else. The realization came quietly. Staying longer would not provide more insight. It would only delay action. And so, without dissatisfaction or complaint, guests began leaving early. Flights were moved forward. Plans were shortened. Departures happened calmly, without explanation. This hotel did not push people out. It removed the reasons to stay. And once clarity arrives, comfort loses its hold. This place did not sell escape. It accelerated decision. And that was only the beginning of what it revealed. As guests settled into the hotel's quiet rhythm, the effect intensified in a way that felt almost invisible at first, because nothing dramatic changed on the surface. Yet everything began shifting internally as the absence of stimulation created an environment where thoughts could no longer be postponed or softened by distraction. The days felt full, but not busy, complete, but not long. The reveal deepened as guests noticed how quickly their usual coping mechanisms failed. There was nowhere to scroll endlessly, nothing demanding attention, no curated experiences pulling them outward. The hotel did not replace noise with activities. It replaced it with silence that lingered just long enough to become uncomfortable. At first, guests tried to recreate motion. They walked the grounds repeatedly. They reorganized their belongings. They reread the same pages. But without external urgency, these actions fell hollow. Movement without purpose lost meaning. The hotel's design reinforced this effect subtly. Spaces were open but not entertaining. Views were calming but not dramatic. There was nothing to chase visually, nothing to consume. The environment offered no escape from oneself. Conversations shifted quickly. Small talk faded. Guests spoke about unresolved plans, difficult choices, and futures they had been delaying. These conversations were not prompted. They emerged naturally, as if the environment stripped away the need for pretense. The buildup intensified when guests realized how quickly clarity was arriving. Decisions they expected to avoid for weeks surfaced within days. Some felt relief, others felt pressure, but everyone felt movement, internal and undeniable. This clarity came with an unexpected side effect. Staying longer began to feel unnecessary. Once insight arrived, there was nothing left to extract from the experience. The hotel had no interest in keeping guests suspended. It offered no illusion of ongoing discovery. It delivered exactly what it promised, then quietly stepped aside. Guests began adjusting departure dates without emotion, not in dissatisfaction, in readiness. The hotel was not draining them, it was completing them. And when something feels complete, the instinct is not to linger. The conflict was forming quietly, because leaving early was not failure. It was the intended outcome, and that realization carried weight. The conflict surfaced when guests began to recognize that the hotel was not shortening their stay by design, but by consequence, because clarity has a way of accelerating decisions once uncertainty is removed, and this environment removed uncertainty with unsettling efficiency. What normally takes months of distraction to postpone was being resolved in days. The buildup intensified as guests compared experiences and noticed the same pattern repeating. Arrivals were relaxed. The first nights felt restorative. Then something shifted. Rest turned into reflection. Reflection turned into reckoning. And reckoning demanded action that could not be taken inside the hotel's walls. This created an unusual tension. The hotel was comfortable, supportive, and calm. There was no dissatisfaction driving departure. Instead, staying longer began to feel like avoidance. Guests sensed that remaining meant delaying action rather than deepening insight. Some guests resisted this realization. They extended stays preemptively. They filled calendars with nothing. They tried to convince themselves that more time would bring more clarity. But the environment no longer offered new information. It had already delivered the essential insight. Anything beyond that felt repetitive. Others accepted the signal immediately. They booked earlier flights. They began planning conversations and changes they would make once they returned. Luggage was packed without urgency, but with purpose. Leaving felt like a next step, not an escape. Staff recognized the pattern clearly. There were no attempts to persuade guests to stay, no incentives offered, no suggestions to extend. The hotel understood its role was not to retain, but to release. The emotional pressure peaked when guests realized something rare. A place had given them what they needed, not what they wanted. The conflict was no longer internal hesitation. It was external readiness. Once clarity arrives, comfort becomes secondary, and remaining in comfort begins to feel dishonest. The hotel had not pushed anyone out. It had simply removed the fog. And when the fog lifts, movement becomes inevitable. The climax was approaching, because departure in this place was not a loss. It was proof that the system had worked. The climax arrived the moment guests stopped negotiating with themselves. There was no dramatic exit, no dissatisfaction, no sense of escape, just certainty. Guests woke one morning and knew they received what they came for, even if they hadn't known they were seeking it. Staying longer would not deepen understanding. It would only delay action. Departures happened quietly. Flights were moved forward. Goodbyes were brief. There was no need to explain. The hotel had accomplished something rare. It had accelerated honesty. By removing distraction, it compressed timelines. Decisions that once felt distant became immediate. Conversations that had been postponed felt unavoidable. The resolution reshaped how guests understood luxury. True comfort is not endless indulgence. It is clarity without resistance. This hotel did not trap people in escape. It returned them to their lives faster, lighter, and more resolved. Guests left carrying less uncertainty and more intention. They moved differently afterward, more decisively, less hesitantly. The legacy of this place was not measured in length of stay. It was measured in speed of return. In a world designed to keep people lingering, this hotel proved something radical. The most powerful experience is one that tells you when to leave. And once you understand that, you stop confusing rest with delay. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The hotel